We can go in a second round here, but shortly, maybe we could also touch briefly also on that question of case selection issues that we touched upon also during that conference. I'm just wondering whether there is also that kind of maybe also political need to look into cases that are usually ignored. Some of the theory developments in political science particularly is really, well, based on a confined set of countries that always serve as an example. Would we believe that, there is some progress in political science if we would be more open in taking other cases on board? I look at Dirk Berg-Schlosser here.
Well, first of all, comparison is a way to overcome ethnocentrism, which is, I think, a very important first step in any case. So, and if we widen our horizon, and, well, unfortunately, and you mentioned the United States, I have been living there for quite a while, but in the United States, still everyone who is a specialist on another country is considered to be a comparativist, even without doing any comparisons at all. So it's already an important step to do it in a conscious way. And also, for a long time, comparisons were mostly confined at a macro level to statistical analyses. And then, almost by necessity, you would ignore outliers. You just look at the regression line or the correlations or the means or whatever, and you ignore the deviating cases. In an area and a cross-area perspective, you are forced to look at a smaller number of cases, but you can do it in greater depth. And, well, fortunately, I think, and this has been a more recent development during the last 20, 25 years, there are now other techniques to do it in a systematic, comparative way. And there has been software which was developed, FSQCA or TOSMANA, which is an acronym for Tools for Small N Analysis. And so we have made progress in this respect. And then by having this methodological progress and to some extent theoretical progress based on these new methodologies and, well, taking account of counterfactuals, etc., developing patterns in certain regions rather than a single outcome. We can have different combinations of factors leading to the same outcome. So, I mean, it's a much more diversified approach, and the insights are more diversified. And then this does have some, I think, practical implications. And if we look at the kind of indices and indicators we have available, I met another small anecdote showing how much certain interests lie behind such indices and indicators, not only at Freedom House, but also to some extent, of course, at Bertelsmann. But I was attending a conference of the Russian Political Science Association some years ago, and there I presented a paper, and a number of Russian colleagues presented another paper concerned with, well, how to measure democracy and things like that. And they had been commissioned by the Russian Foreign Ministry for a large research project because Putin had seen in, I think, 2004 or whenever it was, a ranking of Russia being at the same level as Turkmenistan and some of the other Central Asian states. And Putin said, this cannot possibly be true. And he commissioned a large-scale research project involving more than 40 scientists, economists, statisticians, mathematicians, etc., to collect an enormous amount of data. And out of this came what they called a political atlas of the world. And surprise, surprise, Russia fared much better in that political atlas of the world, which doesn't mean the results are completely useless. I'm not saying this, but I mean, you have to be aware of some of the intentions lying behind it. And in that political atlas, they did not just look at democratization, they looked at state formation, which is an important issue, like with Bertelsmann, but also they looked at some of the policy outcomes or performance of political systems. And so in this respect, it did add some useful information. It was not just purely for propaganda purposes, but we have to be aware of such, biases or reasons behind such large-scale data gathering efforts.
Yeah. Maybe I can add something. Thank you for mentioning Transparency International and Bertelsmann, which are both Germany-based. But in case of transparency, I would say it's not so much biased as other indices. And of course, each instrument is financed and is not neutral. But from our point of view, we use every information we have to have a sort of check and balance information system within our country strategy papers. Because the more you know about the situation you have to address and the drivers of change you have to tackle and so on. But coming to area studies, maybe what we experience in our daily work at the country level is that only focusing of the national system of a partner is too narrow, because the challenges we face are regional challenges or global challenges. For instance, climate change, the topic of illicit financial flow, drug trafficking and so on. And these are phenomena which occur on the regional level, or not only on one region, but on different regional. Yeah. And to learn more about these phenomena could be a very value added of these regional studies.
To make things even worse, I have to say that sometimes even on the subnational level there would be phenomena that could influence what you are doing. So very large parts of peripheries in larger countries usually unobserved, and talking about conflict studies, you know very well that some of those, be that Congo or Chad or Central African Republic or Mali or whatever you can tell, problems started in the periphery and we had it not under our lenses. So sometimes things are even more complicated, and scaling down would also sometimes make sense.
You mentioned outliers. I just wanted to say that the large region category is not easily self-evident. So we often talk about Latin America, and sometimes clear that we're referring to Latin America and the Caribbean. Sometimes it's not. It's the 20 republics of Latin America. It's quite important to be explicit about that. Even when you take the Caribbean, it's nearly always the nation states, the UN member states that get counted. So the result is that if you want a really good outlier, Puerto Rico, which has an economy not much smaller than that of an average Latin American country, if it was an independent state, does not appear in any of the indicators. Now, Puerto Rico ought to appear. In fact, you might even celebrate it for cross-regional comparative purposes, since it's the best place for studying the intersection of Latin American and United States characteristics. But instead of it being pulled out as a way to show how things that work in the United States operate in the Latin American cultural context, and how Latin American characteristics can operate in the United States, which would be the obvious way to study it, it disappears from the map. It's an outlier which disappears, and we lose a lot of information, and that's for purely, accident, really, that the definitional criteria don't encourage. As long-lasting, as durable, from the democratic point of view, there is no Latin American country which has had elections every single 4 years, which have been thoroughly competitive elections based on, the highest standards of vote counting and all the rest of it. How can we study Latin American democracy and forget that case?
That speaks a bit to the question of how we define also areas, where are the boundaries, what is included, etc. Maybe I can get the last question to Ariel here on what are the criteria to define areas? Is that depending on the research question, is that really something we can take for granted, looking at the big ones, Africa, Asia, etc. Maybe you can have a word on this as we worked on such issues.
I think that there is a there's a correct answer, and then there is the answer as we do it. I think that the correct answer is, of course, we should define our areas and define our units of analysis depending on the puzzle that we are choosing to address. I am afraid, though, that the tendency is to default to country as a unit of analysis when, and therefore to ignore certain kinds of phenomenon because they don't fit neatly into the country category. So, for instance, there may be at this point, if you were interested in arms flows or illicit trafficking, the Sahel may be a very effective region where you know better than most, where the boundary, the idea of separating the Sahel into however dozen countries that have boundaries on it is not really effective. The Sahel should be a region, should be considered a region unto itself, and maybe there are other regions that are similarly construed. I'm a big fan of the nested analysis. I'm a big fan of using large N quantitative analysis and case study analysis together. But I've become, the more that I've seen it, and it's sort of become part of the orthodoxy, at least in American political science training, you see more and more graduate students are turning out dissertations that look like that. The more I worry that we are losing the ability to look at phenomena that don't fit in the neat category of the whatever states appear on the Freedom House Index or the Bertelsmann Index. That if they don't appear for whatever reason or if we're missing the data, then it's as if they have disappeared from reality, right? We're allowing the Freedom House Index to dictate what's real and what's not real, which is a problem. We have to be aware of it for comparative area studies to be especially successful.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have to close it at this point. Thank you for those contributions for our panel discussion here, and I may even also use the opportunity to close to some extent that conference here, as it might be too difficult anyways to wrap this up. We had a very rich conference here talking about singular cases, some comparisons on a smaller level, on a larger level. So very different perspectives on our matter of comparative area studies. So it would be too difficult now to condense what we have heard during those days. I think we are still left with a lot of puzzles, with a lot of challenges. Most of all, I'd say methodological questions that were already addressed. But of course, that link back from what we are doing here to the practitioner side is certainly something we want to exploit further, to go into more in-depth discussions with the practitioner side. I hope that there will be opportunities. So I would like to thank everybody here on the panel, in the audience, and all the other participants, but most particularly as well, once again, the Federal Ministry for its generous support to this conference. Thank you, Ms. Pragua, as representing that institution. Thank you, everybody. And yeah, I close that conference at this point. Thank you.